So just to kind of go through, I suppose, who we are and where we came from. So according to the latest figures on food poverty in Ireland, 1 in 12 people are living in food poverty, but at the same time, we know that food loss and waste is responsible for 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is a serious environmental issue. So FoodCloud has taken these problems and created a solution that enables businesses and community organisations to provide their own responses to food issues that arise in their localities. So we do this in two particular ways. So we first off have an app, a technology solution, which connects local stores, shops across the country who have small volumes of surplus food on a daily basis to be able to offer that food to charities who are in their locality. So they simply upload onto our app the food that they have for donation on any given day. And we have scheduled an organisation locally in their area who may be interested in that food, and they can accept it or reject it. If they accept it, they go to the store and collect it at an agreed time. And if they reject it, that donation then gets offered to a different organisation. So this happens in small communities across the country every day, both rurally and across urban areas. So then we also have our warehouses. We have 3 large warehouses, one located in Galway, Cork and Dublin. And from those warehouses, we distribute much larger volumes of food. So we take in food from the food industry that appears in very high quantities. It could be 17 pallets of ice cream that no one charity would be able to take. So we take it in and we distribute it in smaller quantities out to the charity sector from those warehouses. We also, from those warehouses, are the administrative partner with the Department of Employee Affairs and Social Protection on the fund for the European Aid to the Most Deprived, which is the FEED programme, which is a way of for charities to access non-perishable foods throughout the year. So that's managed by the Department of Social Protection, and we just do the administration around that programme from our warehouses. So to date, we've distributed 10,000 tonnes of food in Ireland alone, and that has gone out to about 600 plus charities and community groups across the country. In 2020, we increased the demand. What we saw was a severe increase in demand earlier in the year due to the pandemic lockdown and subsequent restrictions. And we saw that about a 95% increase in the amount of food that we were distributing in the same time last year. So that was about we distributed about 2,500 tonnes of food so far this year, which was quite significant for us. So we saw this increased need arise not only from organisations that we currently worked with, but we definitely see organisations that we were currently working with having to adapt and start to provide food parcels and need more food because of it, but also for organisations that we had never worked with before who were filling gaps in their localities for emergency food provision. So all of this came together to create a massive demand and supply that we did struggle to meet during that period. Just to say that we also work closely with FareShare in the UK and across Northern Ireland. So our technology is shared with FareShare, and that is used across stores as well in the UK and up north. So just to go through a little bit about what we did in March. So in March, we gave every organisation that we worked with a call to see who was open, who was closed, and what support was needed. What we found was that many organisations were already closed, and many were scaling down, and so their need for food was becoming very narrow because perhaps they were scaling down to only provide Meals on Wheels, whereby they had footfall for a daycare centre or something like that. So we saw a lot of scaling down, and we also saw that 300 organisations was definitely staying open, and that many of them were already seeing an unprecedented rise in food need in their localities. So we did a number of things. First of all, we linked up any organisations who needed more food where possible through our FoodCloud app to local shops across the country who may have extra food to share. So we did this on scale, and then we also agreed with every organization that we worked with that whatever happened, business as usual would continue, and that included all of the deliveries and everything that came out of our warehouses. So we ensured that continued. We streamlined our operations so that we could support what was an unprecedented rise in organizations providing food parcels. So across Ireland, we've always had some organizations doing that, but we had never seen it at this level before. We also then scaled down our volunteers on site just to remove risk, and changed to shift work and brought on a number of new warehouse operatives to help us to manage that, kind of making sure that nothing changed for organizations. We also approached the government-led community call initiative and presented to community champions across the country on perhaps what support was in their area that we knew of. And also we created the Community Food Link, which was an interactive map whereby organizations could volunteer to put themselves up there and therefore be available publicly to anybody who might need support in their area. And then we would share this map with anybody who got in contact with us looking for support, or any of the community champions who may be able to find an organization close by there on that map. So I suppose what was really important at this point in time was what we needed to make sure that this was going to be sustainable. So we launched a food and funding appeal for donations out to our food industry and corporate partners and supporters. And then we suspended membership fees for any organisation who contributed membership fees to FoodCloud. So some of what we do is completely free to organisations, and some does require membership fees. So for the period of 6 months, we completely suspended those fees. We understood that we were going to see an increase in organisations setting up emergency food responses across the country, and so to ensure that we would be in a position to support as much of the country as possible, we proactively approached the ILDN and the local development network across the country to ask them to survey their areas to see what food provision existed and where there might be extra support needed, perhaps through parcels. We did not want to be in a position, for instance, that we were working with 150 organisations in Dublin City and none in Donegal. So we just really felt like we needed to reach out at this point in time to make sure that we had a regional spread, because nobody knew what was going to happen next. So where infrastructure existed already, we worked closely to create links between FoodCloud members and LDCs and other organisations, and where infrastructure for emergency food was missing, we developed strategic partnerships with local development companies and with large community organisations who were best placed to identify local needs and to manage logistics. So this was a really successful approach that ensured that we potentially had a reach in every county in the Republic of Ireland. Our biggest challenge then and now has been to sustain the volume of good, nutritious food over the course of the months, as demand has definitely increased, and we have moved so far towards food parcel use. So in preparation to meet this continuing challenge, we trialled the procurement of food this year for the first time, where we bought some products and helped supplement our surplus food with those out to charities. We also have gone out looking for more donations from the food industry and continue to do so. And we launched our first national food appeal, which was Food for Ireland, and it took place over the weekend of the 17th to the 20th of September, when we went out through 4 of our national retailers and did an in-store appeal for food donations of non-perishable products that was suitable for hampers. So I just want to touch on some of the learnings that, some of the insights that have come from other surveys and our own. So from the Family Resource National Forum survey, the Family Resource Centres said that they had to adapt really quickly to COVID-19 and to meet emergency needs within their locality. So there was a sharp increase in a need for food and essential home supplies that hadn't been seen before, and so they really found themselves in a situation where they were on the front line to filling that gap. And the National COVID-19 Food Survey by UCD looked at people's personal experiences. 20% of respondents reported eating a limited variety of foods, and 10% reported consuming food that they didn't want due to lack of food availability, but then also just on the impact on the community sector. They looked at how this COVID-19 really impacted some of the most vulnerable in our society because, among others, because of the missing of the schools meals program. We saw a lot of feedback about as well, and the increase in cost of staying at home and the increased pressure on charitable services. So we ourselves went back to our organisations and asked them what the experience was in the preceding months. And what we found interesting was that in our survey, about 47% of charities claimed that they were already distributing food to people before COVID, and about 10% said they started doing this because of COVID. And what that tells us, what that told us was that what we saw in our network was largely a scaling up rather than a setting up, so that network already existed. It was just that the need increased, and therefore they had to scale up that distribution. And the food support was being provided before the pandemic. So some level of food insecurity did exist before the pandemic, but that this need increased dramatically because of the restrictions. So in that survey, 65% of our partners were concerned that this demand would rise again. And I think, from the new restrictions that we heard yesterday evening, we have no doubt but that it will. So what we know is that we have just been through a really unprecedented time where people found themselves struggling to feed their families and experiencing acute levels of financial strain. And we want to speak about food insecurity because it is not only an issue of poverty in the traditional sense, but many people live under financial pressure and they are struggling as opposed to poor. And therefore, when times of downturn or crisis happen, like we've recently seen, they're especially vulnerable. So food insecure communities are more vulnerable to shocks like COVID-19, and we really saw the impact of that this year. So just I suppose finally, whether in a crisis or not, there are key areas where I would suggest that more work needs to continue to be done and develop better. First off, I suppose there is a real importance in recognizing informal food redistribution networks across our country and the importance of them, and other community food services, and understanding and recognizing them, mapping them and sharing that information and understanding where they are, and making sure that the public are aware of that also. We also need local and national networks like this one, working together on food security and identifying local gaps and opportunities on an ongoing basis to ensure that we have the right infrastructure in the right place at the right time, because we never know what's around the corner. And then nationally, I suppose what we would like to see a real recognition of food support as essential in government emergency responses, and greater support, I suppose, for food banks who fill the gaps in times like these. So, and that isn't like, so FoodCloud would have our 3 large food banks across the country, but there are other large food banks also who also need that kind of support. And then to support with the funding and the food supplies for our food banks to meet that increased demand, but also to make sure that we're able to supply food that is meeting the nutritional need of people who are in a difficult situation. From our own perspective, we really have learned a lot, I suppose, from this, but we definitely need to now focus on developing a better understanding of how food insecurity plays out in Ireland, but also, and more importantly, within our own FoodCloud community network, so that we can understand how we can support them. We need to diversify our own food sources away from only surplus food, which we found difficult to rely on during this period, and it can be quite inconsistent and unreliable. And so we really do need to kind of look elsewhere as well to make sure that we're supplementing that food. And we must continue to provide flexible and efficient systems that support how responses to food insecurity change over time and place.